Thanks so much for joining me. We had a very active weekend of severe thunderstorms across the Canadian Prairies once again, with all three provinces experiencing damaging hail at times. I actually took this image out here north of Hanna on Saturday, July the 4th. This storm was producing very large hail at the time this image was shot. Of course, these storms can be very visually striking, if not very ominous to look at as they approach. Satellite imagery shot on July the 6th, hosted at NASA Worldview, shows evidence of these hailstorms across the prairie provinces. You can see, if you look carefully, these little swaths that have been cut into these young croplands. Later in the season, when there's more biomass to be flattened by these storms, these swaths can be much more apparent, but we can see evidence of these here, well northeast of Red Deer, as well as southeast of Red Deer out north of Hanna there on July the 4th. July 5th, adding new swaths southeast of Calgary, northwest of Lethbridge, and this long broken swath here from southeast Alberta across much of southwestern Saskatchewan on July the 5th. Farmers call these the Great White Combine for a reason, because, hail can be damaging in more than one way. Of course, large hail can be damaging to things like homes and vehicles, but, dime or nickel-size hail driven by the winds can easily flatten crops. So that's what we saw, unfortunately, in a year that's already been somewhat challenging for some farming across the Canadian prairies. Satellite imagery on July the 4th showing those initial round of storms there in eastern Alberta pushing into northwestern Saskatchewan, with that second rash of supercells just charging across central Alberta, producing hail here. And this is a radar product that's showing maximum expected hail size. And we can see the swaths of those storms over time. Lots of hailstorms there in central Alberta, east central Alberta, northwest Saskatchewan, central areas of Saskatchewan, even into far western Manitoba there, with the strongest storm likely here from Bowden, Alberta, out across into the Hanna area. And that storm probably producing the largest stones across the prairies on July the 4th. And here's evidence of that. This image, this tweet from Matt Melnick north of Hanna. These stones are larger than golf balls, and they look, very dense, very spherical, probably quite heavy, very damaging to things like vehicles and homes. So we saw evidence of that out there. This one I shot also with that same storm as it was quickly charging eastward. I mean, these storms are moving like 60, 70 kilometers an hour. So if you were out there and you saw these storms, it's coming quick. It hits hard while it's here and then it's gone. And this here, of course, is a very striking looking shelf cloud associated with that storm. And of course, you can see very impressive structure with these more destructive hailstorms as they charge across the prairie provinces. Satellite imagery from July the 5th showing yet another round of severe storms in two different areas. You may notice out here in the eastern prairies, also southeast Saskatchewan, southwestern Manitoba, couple rounds of very severe storms there that produced large and damaging hail, as well as back in the western prairies, once again, a second round for southern Alberta, southwestern Saskatchewan. Some of these storms going very long track, also moving very quickly. We're talking, 70 kilometers an hour, 80 kilometers an hour in some cases. Very fast moving storm. Makes them hard to kind of escape if you're in the path of them, if you're trying to drive away from these storms. They're coming quickly. Of course, our mesh product here is showing that maximum expected hail size on the 5th, with several hailstorms there across southern Alberta, as we saw in the satellite imagery. One of these storms really was quite impressive. It started just before noon west of Calgary along the foothills and tracked all the way across southern Saskatchewan, like 15 hours, over 800 kilometers, causing sporadic damage in different areas here. In particular, their special area 2, southeastern Alberta, as well as southwestern areas of Saskatchewan. It went right through Swift Current late in the evening. And so this was a very impactful storm. But we also had, these are perhaps short. These didn't travel as far across the landscape, but they produced very large hail. In fact, the largest stones on the 5th were likely falling here in the southwestern part of Manitoba. And so, we saw impacts, unfortunately, out here. This is a farmer in Special Area 2 in southeastern Alberta there, likely associated with this area here of this storm track, with, unfortunately, just flattened crops there. Hopefully, these crops can recover, with favorable conditions through the summer, but that does not look very good. Farther southwest, this is another image I shot from the Carmangay area, northwest of Lethbridge. This was a very striking storm. You can see this sort of churning motion here in the storm and this kind of deep aquamarine color inside the storm. This was very striking, and this storm was just sucking what we call inflow. This is winds blowing toward the storm, and the storm is ingesting this air, this unstable air, and kind of feeding the storm. can help it be quite intense. And of course, this is some of the strongest inflow that I've ever experienced with a thunderstorm in Alberta. So if you're ever watching a storm approaching you and the winds are just blowing into it very, very strongly at your back, that's a sign this storm is ingesting lots of air, and it could be quite strong. It could be, producing very large hail and perhaps other threats like damaging winds and tornadoes. So we have to watch out for that. They can be very striking once again. Tweet here from Kyle Hetherington, north of Lethbridge there near Picture Butte, with golf ball sized hail coming out of this storm. We had reports of even larger stones. Storm chaser Ben Chernesky here as well, documenting this flattened grassland in the Tabor area. So we do have evidence once again of crop damage and damage to grasslands and whatnot through southern Alberta associated with these storms. Of course, southwestern Manitoba as well, seeing damaging storms. And of course, this is in Killarney. Tweet here from Dustin Freeman showing the ground covered in hail here. So we know we had an impactful storm there, and just shredded leaves and branches. And it looks like there's even some big tree limb down here. And so it looks like it was a fairly impactful storm there, and very large hailstones. Always good to report hail with reference objects, like not a hand. Nobody knows the size of your hand, but we know what the size of a toonie is, or a golf ball, or a softball. Hopefully not. But I mean, this thing looks like it's getting up toward like baseball size. So very large hailstones there, damaging hail in southwestern Manitoba as well. Now, what causes these storms? Why are we seeing so much active weather recently? What's the meteorological environment that sort of favors these type of hailstorms? Well, in the summertime, we're in peak severe thunderstorm season in the Canadian Prairies right now. One of our main ingredients that we need for storms is moisture, which can make the atmosphere more unstable. And we've got a lot of moisture this year. It's been a very wet, kind of late spring, early summer. So with more warm weather approaching, these crops are going to be maturing. They're going to be giving off more water vapor to the atmosphere through a process called evapotranspiration. This is fuel for storms. Then all you need is this sort of background environment here to support rapid storm development and sort of more organized storm structures. And what's happening here, you can see there's the Canadian Prairies up here. And this is showing the jet stream at noon on July the 5th. And we can see there's this upper trough here over BC, and a jet stream in the middle part of the atmosphere kind of spreading out eastward across the Canadian Prairies there. You have this spinning air in the middle part of the atmosphere, and downstream you get rising air, which makes it sort of more favorable for storms to develop. And then with that jet stream, it can help organize these storms through wind shear. And of course, if the storms are traveling in that jet stream, they're going to be moving very fast, which is what we saw. So if you see an upper trough approaching the prairies in the summertime, it's warm and humid out there, you're probably going to be having an outbreak of severe thunderstorms. Very classic here for severe weather setup across the prairies. Now, whether we could see more severe thunderstorms across the prairies this week, let's take a quick look at the forecast here. This is showing winds in the middle part of the atmosphere, and we can see as the week goes on, that jet stream really continuing across the region. As we get into late day Tuesday, we start to see a bit of a trough approaching here from the west, bringing some jet stream flow into far western Alberta that could support the risk of a few isolated severe thunderstorms in southwestern Alberta, likely confined to the terrain, but these storms could produce large hail. Getting into Wednesday, though, that trough approaching and that jet stream really pushing into Alberta there, likely supporting another outbreak of severe thunderstorms across much of Alberta, getting into western Saskatchewan into Wednesday. And then as we get later into the week, we're starting to see these, sort of an upper ridge developing here over much of the United States, very hot temperatures. Meanwhile, very cool temperatures to the northwest, and that's causing a fairly strong contrast in temperatures, which leads to a very strong jet stream. So this could result in a fairly strong jet and more severe weather chances as we get into later in the week across the prairies. And of course, here this forecast lightning flash density map showing Tuesday, again, some isolated potential there along the terrain in southwestern Alberta, and then into Wednesday, fairly widespread outbreak of thunderstorms across much of central eastern Alberta, western Saskatchewan, and then into Thursday, likely shifting east into the eastern prairies, but also some residual action back in the western prairies. So the potential is there for more severe thunderstorms over the next few days, and as we get into the weekend as well, potentially, with that jet stream really strengthening across the region. If you like the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Otherwise, thanks so much for joining, and we'll talk to you next time.